Today, I want to talk about what I'm calling controlling an accident. And this is a strange phenomenon that happens when you feel like you're making something happen, as if you're this independent force that can instigate an independent cause from the whole. And that is simply just the feeling of a free will is this absurd thing that I'm calling controlling an accident. So I want to see if I can point your attention to this strange thing and to help you realize you are not making anything happen, because nothing in the universe is made. Nothing. So I hope that you'll stick around into this absurd journey of accident control. There seems to be a distinct difference between a contrived, made-up, forced type of an action and one that is spontaneous, whimsical, and out of the blue. But I wonder if the impetus behind any action has a different instigator. Let's first dive into the realm of enlightenment. This is one of my favorite topics. Because it has so many different labels. And I'm going to give you a list of labels that are all synonymous. Enlightenment, an epiphany, a conversion experience, an awakening, salvation, an aha moment, a dawning of the light, being swept up in the rapture, and being taken by surprise. All of these phenomena are described. Oh, one more. Shift in consciousness. That's my favorite way of describing this thing. A shift in consciousness. All of those words I just listed for you are ways of describing some kind of right seeing that is described in the convert, or some kind of eyes open. The Buddha called it I am awake, nirvana, the blown out state. Jesus referred to this thing as the kingdom of heaven that you can see, not with signs perceived. And so the people who can't see it, who don't know it, who aren't aware of it, are spiritually unconscious or asleep. And suddenly, one wakens. One sees the so-called light. And this phenomenon This shift in consciousness, this deeper understanding that surpasses cognition and logic, supposedly, is as whimsical as a butterfly landing on your nose. Everyone who describes this phenomenon seems to have come at it at a certain angle. And the angle is, I was taken by surprise. I was minding my own business, and suddenly I saw the light. And there's your spiritual path right there. Your so-called spiritual path. The seeker can't seek it. So, you have an establishment called religion. In Christianity, I'm going to pick on our Christian friends, because we really need to examine this so-called road to Damascus. So here's how the conversion experience works. At least how it worked in a pretty wretched individual called Saul, who pulled people from their homes and beat and tortured them for being Christian. We often forget that the Apostle Paul was as wretched as they come before he was, quote unquote, converted. He was minding his own business, being a horrible, deplorable person. And all of a sudden, he fell to his knees and described the process as scales falling off of his eyes. So he recognized that he was unconscious at some level. Something expanded, something shifted, like an earthquake or a hurricane, or being shat upon by a bird. An accident. Conversions are accidents. When the light bulb goes on, you don't structure it. That's what an epiphany is. So, the so-called conversion experience is put into a curriculum called the spiritual path. So we make a syllabus out of it. We make a structure out of something that is completely whimsical and takes its victim by surprise. And I use the word victim because you don't have a choice. Victim or winner, it doesn't matter. It's just like death. Are you a victim of death? How can you be a victim of what's coming? You see. So, the so-called experiencer of this epiphany is taken by something they call surprise. I was taken by surprise. So the setup to the spiritual seeker is someone minding their own damn business, even perhaps being a pretty wretched individual. Plundering and destroying. Suffering, creating suffering, not knowing what they're doing, walking around with their eyes closed in some deep level of being. So along comes the church. And Christians call this process salvation. And the way they do it is they dunk you in some water, make you say a few prayers, and you're supposed to be fixed of your spiritual sin. You're supposed to be free from fear if you follow Jesus. And you do everything Jesus said. You follow the prayers, you seek the kingdom of heaven, and you find it when you're dunked in water. And the next day, people don't understand why they haven't converted. Oh, they think they've converted. They feel so good, and then they still fear. They still fear this God in the sky is punishing them for their so-called sins. So we get to another word that nobody understands, which is separation, which is sin. And what's so funny about Christianity is that Jesus was supposed to be sinless. Yet, see, here's the big but of this story. He was sinless, yet fully human. And to me, to be fully human would be completely separate from this thing called God. So I'm going to pick on the church again. If Jesus is supposed to be sinless, which is what the church purports, then it doesn't take one to know one. How did God inhabit a human without sin? Without this separation from the unity that Jesus called the Father. See, Jesus doesn't know you if he doesn't understand sin from a first-hand perspective. Jesus' understanding of sin was merely hearsay if he was sinless. If he didn't struggle with lust, which is supposed to be a sin, lying, cheating, stealing, feeling destitute, feeling disconnected from the world, how would he know you? He's some ideal that doesn't exist. He's a concept. So the sinless one knows everything about sin without having experienced this thing we call sin. Do you see how absurd this is? Because it truly would take one to know one. Yet Jesus was clean and white as snow. And if he was clean and white as snow, so am I. If he was one with the Father, so am I. If he had miraculous powers, so do I. Well, I'm willing to say I'm a big fat sinner. And I'm not even a religious person. I understand it. I understand what it feels like to be isolated, poor, dejected. You know, there was this story in the Bible about a prostitute who's about to be stoned. And Jesus said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And all those men who were about to stone that prostitute did not cast a stone. And what I find funny about that story is that Jesus should have picked up a handful of stones and clobbered that bitch. He was sinless. He had every right to take the stones and throw it at her until she bled to death. He was sinless, but he did not pick up a stone. Was he admitting that he knows something that we've taken away from him? His right to be sinful. To no one. Of course, I love picking on the Christians because they have systemized this accident and called it baptism. If you're baptized, then you're going to have this accident called conversion. You're going to have this experience that Saul did. He's on the road to Damascus, and the light struck him down. And every single guru and sage and person who claims to have been through this so-called shift says it takes them by absolute surprise. And out of the wild blue yonder, light dawns upon you like a thief in the night. how can baptism be replicated? How can you replicate this experience through baptism? It doesn't seem to work. And then they say, okay, now we need confirmation. You confirm that you no longer fear death. And that you renounce your individuation. And you sense this complete and total trust with the universe. Let me tell you something. You can't control an accident. You can't systemize whimsy. And that is exactly what religion tries to do. Make it happen. That's because they are under the impression that we live in a universe that's made by a God in the sky out there. Nothing in the universe is made. There's no evidence of it being made. Like a clock. It's begotten. Not made. Of one being with the Father. Of course, that's what it says in the Nicene Creed. So, if there is a person out there who is listening to the very words that I'm speaking at this moment, you are on the path and you don't even know it. The real spiritual path is one you don't know you're on until after you've crossed into Jordan. Until after you've experienced this so-called accidental shift, this epiphany, this aha that came out of nowhere. If the process is to be out of the blue and you are supposed to be taken by surprise, how are you going to schedule it? I'm going to be taken by surprise Tuesday at 3:14 in the afternoon. And that's exactly what control is. This absurd sense that you can control an accident. And that's an oxymoron. Everything is happening in this accidental precipice called the present moment. Whimsy is now. Spontaneity is now. And see, what's interesting about this is that you don't know that you're asleep until after the so-called shift happens. And there is a shift. But if I'm telling everybody there's a shift and they should awaken, it would be akin to going to a very deep sleeper and asking quietly, without waking them up, "Are you awake?" How can somebody who's sleeping answer that question? They're groggy. Even if they're partially awake, they're groggy and most likely will not remember what you said. In the physical world, you know you've slept because you feel the after effects of sleeping. That might be what feeling alive is the after effect of already having been dead. You see. So that's where the element of surprise sort of gets blurred. You kind of know something more and more and more about yourself. And that is that you will not die. You do not die. The people who you so-called leave behind when you do die, they grieve. But you won't grieve. There will be nothing left of you to grieve. You won't experience that sensation of, "Oh man, I'm dead." But yet we still grieve because the ego believes the person disappeared. And so the ego still has to go through that. Even Jesus cried when his friend Lazarus died. But what makes that story so ridiculous is that he brought him back to life. And then Lazarus died again. That's all absurd. My point is, you cannot direct whimsy. And that's what your sense of control is. And if you are seeking anything, as Jesus commanded to seek the kingdom of God, you are hook, line, and sinker falling for something that's not hiding. And I've said this before, but Jesus called out the establishment, and an establishment was made. So the kettle calls the pot black, and then the pot calls the kettle black. And this us versus them never goes away, does it? You got the people who are converted and the people who aren't converted. You can't quite put your finger on it. That's what makes it puzzling. And that's what makes this whole thing bewildering, because even if your consciousness shifts, you're still in this accident. You're still in this whimsy. You're still here, caught in this bewildering state. It's just that it doesn't scare you. It doesn't scare the shit out of you anymore. And you welcome death. And you allow it to be. And so you can call me a evangelical entertainer. I see both sides. I see the control and I see the accident. And they go together in some strange way. But please don't try to systemize anything I'm saying. Don't make a path out of something that has no direct path. There's no direct path to an epiphany. And suppose you have to mind your own business. My name is Ryan. I hope that you enjoyed these insights and that you've enjoyed my channel. And if you have, please check out my blog. It's called mymorningmotivator.com. Just little 200, 300 word essays. Takes a couple minutes to read every day except Sunday. And one of my books on Amazon, if you could check that out. And I appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time.